Welcome into the Stack Shack podcast. My name is Nathaniel. It is great to have you with us here today. I am joined, as always, with my good buddy Gabe. And new camera angle for me. I'm in a new office, so little different view. But today, Stack Shack Cinema. We had a big release that we've been talking about for a while. On the podcast. And it has now come out. We binged the whole thing, and we're ready to dive in. We're gonna break this review of Shadow and Bone. If you weren't already aware, came out just this past weekend, and we watched it. We have a lot of thoughts on it, but we're gonna break the review kind of in two sections. We're gonna start with a spoiler-free section. Okay, so we'll start by just giving kind of our general thoughts, whether we liked it or not, whether we would recommend you watch it, what kind of person you should be if you want to watch it. And then we'll make it very abundantly clear that we're about to jump into spoilers, and we'll get into a nice deep dive of, not necessarily episode by episode, but a deep dive into everything about the show. So, Gabe, general thoughts, spoiler-free. What'd you think? Who should be watching it? Are you recommending this to people? What are your thoughts?
I enjoyed it. I'd probably say it's a good, it's a 7.5 out of 10 for me.
Okay.
There's definitely a lot of the things I enjoyed about it. I thought the acting was really good. I thought the effects and costume design, I felt immersed in the world from how they portrayed it.
Yeah.
And the story was interesting. There's definitely some complaints I have about it. I felt like the story was rushed at sometimes. And for me personally, I'm not huge into the young adult genre.
Yeah, that's
YA,
true.
YA fantasy.
Yeah.
And this was very, very heavily leaning on those tropes. So those
Yeah.
were elements I didn't enjoy.
Okay.
But if you're someone who enjoys those things and you enjoy fantasy, this is going to be a solid show I would recommend for you.
Nice. Yeah, I think I would agree. I really enjoyed it. I think costume design really jumped out to me as well. It was very pleasant to look at, and like you said, it was immersive.
Yes.
It really did feel immersive. I thought overall the pacing I thought was fairly good. A few things did feel a little rushed. And again, I think if your expectations are set correctly going into it, and when I say correct expectations, don't expect like, I guess I'd compare it to maybe something like, well, everybody's comparing it to Game of Thrones, but I don't know if that's the right comparison. But don't expect a Game of Thrones. It's not. It's very much. There's a difference. It's not a TVMA show, right? It's TV-14. It is targeted at teens and up, but inclusive of those teens. Whereas something like Game of Thrones or something like Vikings is very much, we're not really making this for teenagers. We're making this for adults only. So it was definitely inclusive of those groups. So, if you're an adult, I know watching it, there were a few moments that I was like, okay, yeah, maybe teenage me would have been like, oh, that's kind of cool, but adult me is kind of like, oh boy.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's a couple
that's a little
scenes
cringe.
There's a couple scenes where I'm definitely like, yes, yeah, I've seen that trope before many times.
Yeah, it's there are things that you've seen. It isn't, I wouldn't consider it the most like original groundbreaking fantasy. It's your typical chosen one story. And so,
yeah.
But I don't want to give away too much. But yeah, I would recommend, if you enjoy fantasy, go watch it. Especially, I would recommend this if you have like kids or something, right? And you're like, well, I can't quite show them, Game of Thrones, or I can't show them The Witcher yet, right? They're not old enough to handle that. This might be a good kind of introductory fantasy along the lines of maybe something you would do with like a Lord of the Rings, right? As far as, very different styles of fantasy, but a similar, what I would say, like age allowance as far as how the content was portrayed. So that's yeah, that's the general spoiler-free thoughts. So if you haven't watched it and that little, snippet made you think, oh, maybe I would enjoy this, go watch it right now and then come back and hear the rest of our thoughts. But at this point, spoilers are all fair game now. Um, and I want to start off, Gabe, with uh, what what was the you mentioned, and I think we both probably have the same sort of side of things here. What was the part that bothered you? I'm going to start with the negatives and then we'll get into maybe more of
So,
the positives.
I have some complaints, right?
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, there's like three plots to this story, right? We got Alina
Mm-hmm.
with her whole coming of age,
Yep.
becoming the chosen one, what she's doing at the little palace.
Mm-hmm.
Loved that. We
Yeah.
have the crew.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of the guy's name now, but Jesper and why can't I think of him?
Kaz.
Kaz, thank you.
Yes,
Yeah,
Kaz.
Kaz and
Inej.
Inesh. Yeah, I loved them. They were probably my favorite part of the show. I like heist. I really enjoy the heist element of that, and
Mm-hmm.
the element of here's the crew, here's also all of their roles.
Yeah.
And then we had the Grisha that was captured. I can't even remember her name. Um,
Oh, yeah.
Nina. Nina.
Nina.
Yeah.
Yes, Nina.
I'm assuming that if season 2 she'll play a bigger role,
Yeah.
but in this season she did nothing. It was felt like filler. There was no point to that. Okay, sure, she has a romance with what's his face.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing came of that. It didn't impact any of the other plots. The other two tied in together very well because obviously one's
Yeah.
trying to kidnap the other one.
Yep.
So that plot I didn't really care to have in there at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think with that plot taking up more time, a lot of that could have been used to develop more of the relationships with the other plots.
Mm.
'Cause, I loved the crew, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't feel like I got their relationships together. Like I didn't understand all their relationships very well.
Hmm.
Um, like I get he's the boss. You got Jesper, who's your gunman, and then you have your assassin kind of girl, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
they're filling the basic roles, but I don't know why they're filling those roles.
Mm.
I could have had more of a flesh out of their character development, like how they became a crew. Maybe not even like needing that, just needing that. I want to see their bonds as a crew a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Alina and Mal's relationship was very well developed,
Yeah.
and the whole backstory with Alexander Kiergan,
Mm-hmm.
those were very well done. But there are times where, oh, here's a very big exposition dump. Oh, let's learn about the Black Heretic right now.
Yeah.
Like, oh, do you know the story? Yeah, and then of course she tells him the story right there.
Yeah.
Like, okay, yeah, some of those elements. What's the librarian guy who like, oh yeah, you know the legend of the stag, right?
Oh, yeah.
So there are times where I felt like those could have been done better. I don't know if this is how the show decided to portray it or how the original author decided to do them.
Mm-hmm.
But if they had more time to flesh out some of those moments, I would have appreciated it more.
Yeah. Maybe instead of focusing on Nina. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then again, we touched on the YA tropes. This is very much a young adult fantasy novel,
Mm-hmm.
based off of one. So at my age now, those tropes aren't my favorite anymore.
You have to have a love triangle in every young adult novel. There has to be a love triangle, right?
And
Gosh.
this love triangle didn't even bother me as much as some other ones.
That's true. That's true. It didn't bother me as much, but it was still there.
Yeah. And then, well, I guess some of the other things that annoyed me. So like at the beginning, we had Mal steals food from the one Grisha, the wind one, whatever her name was, and she was all flirty.
Yeah.
And then we have like the next episode, she and Ilena get in the fight. That's their whole interaction, and then at the end, she comes back into play a thing.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, oh yeah, it felt a little shoehorned.
Yeah.
So just some of those things bothered me.
Mm-hmm.
They just felt like they could have been fleshed out a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are my biggest complaints with the series.
Okay. Yeah. I think I would somewhat agree with you. I actually liked the Nina storyline.
Really? Okay.
I did. I didn't mind it at all. I do a completely. It didn't tie in like at all. It literally didn't tie in at all, and
Yeah.
so I can totally understand how, it looking back on it, it feels like, well, why was that in there? I think while I was watching it, I was expecting it to tie in some way. Um, but what I think it did, at least for me, is that storyline had so much world building in it, at least for me.
Okay.
In seeing these cultures, like, so we have our main storyline, chosen one storyline coming into herself, Alina storyline, right?
Right.
And then we have our side characters, which is our the crew,
The
the
crew.
crows, yeah. Them, coming in and trying to kidnap her, and then I felt like the Nina storyline. One, I think it showed a little bit extra, and gave a little extra motivation for Kirigan,
Okay.
because it showed what the Grisha, like how they were treated by the Fjordans, right? Is it
Yeah.
Fjordans? I think so.
Yeah. It's Fjordans.
Um, I thought being able to, because, like, you don't under the Fjordans are one of the main reasons that the Grisha have like the fortress and are so protective, and they attack Alina on the road early on. Like, their whole goal is to come in and capture and kill Grisha, right?
Right. Yeah.
And to be able to see a little bit more of the Fjordans' culture, as well as to see how they treat Grisha, um, I think to me added a lot to the motivation behind Akirigan to do the bad things he's doing, so to speak. Um,
Okay.
and I think, as you mentioned, I think her story, season two, will probably become way more important. Um,
Yes.
like
When we
they're
saw at
they,
the end.
yeah.
Okay.
So I think, I don't mind. I didn't. I guess my thing was, her storyline didn't bother me. I thought it was, as a storyline itself. I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. Like her relationship with the guy, didn't feel like it felt like it was handled fairly well.
Okay.
In my mind, and it allowed for a lot of exposition as far as the two cultures and why did they hate each other and how different were they. um I also know that, um that storyline was one of the, like, fan favorites from the book.
Got it.
um
Okay.
Specifically the line of, and I thought nobody could be stupider than they were tall, yet here you stand. um that line that she gives, I know, was like literally commented like 1,000 times on every trailer. And so, because that's what I noticed, the fans of the books, because I haven't read the books. So I would read the comments to see how they were interacting with the trailer, and they would literally just post quotes that they thought were going to be in the show, their favorite quotes from the book, in every comment section of a trailer. And one of the most quoted ones was that one. The other
Okay.
quote that was mentioned a lot, was Kirigan to Alina at the end saying, "Fine, make me your villain."
Okay.
Um, so having not read the books, having not been a fan of the series until the show came out, and now I am a fan. I really enjoyed it. I'll be eagerly awaiting season two. Um, I I get the impression that that storyline does come back around. Um,
Hmm.
and I think it may turn out, once it does come back around, I feel like we'll be really glad we had that storyline in season one. You know what I mean? Like,
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
it's going to make, when these characters do start to intersect, um, like we are seeing them start to at the very end of the show, on the boat. I think we're gonna be happy that we had a full season to flesh out Nina's character, and I forget the guy's name. Is it
Matthias or something like that.
Matthias? Yeah, Matthias or something like that. Matthias.
Yeah.
Um, so though I think we're gonna be happy that those characters were fleshed out in a season once we see them start to interact. Um,
Now, to me, I didn't feel like Nina's character was fleshed out that much, but that might just be my opinion.
hmm. Yeah,
Like we see her.
she
Oh,
doesn't have much
She tricks the.
development.
Yeah, she tricks the hotel owner, so I have like no sympathy for her. She gets captured. Okay, there's kind of sympathy, and now she's developing this relationship with this guy that we don't know outside of this.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it didn't have any tie-in to the other ones. It wasn't like besides Kiergan's like we need to find Nina.
Yeah.
If it had more tie-in, I would have had more emotional investment into it for me. But
That's
because we
true.
didn't have any of that, it just kind of felt like, well, you're taking me away from the other two plot lines which are intersecting.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
so it always just felt jarring to me to switch to that when we had like I want to just want show me Jesper, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Jesper doing like those trick shots again. Give me um Mal fighting for his life. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's what I wanted more of. So,
Mm. Yeah.
but
I again, I would agree with you. I would have liked more of that, but I think we're gonna be glad that they took the time with Nina. And maybe not like flesh out her character and her motivations, but at least flesh out her personality.
yeah,
Um, and then
and introduce her.
like I said, I think that storyline's role, at least in for me, was to demonstrate the Fjordans and the Grisha and how they interact, and kind of some of the motivations behind these two cultures that are at war, and provide motivation for Kiergan to be so aggressive, I guess,
Um,
in his actions.
I think I would disagree with that.
Hmm.
Like I see, yes, that part that it adds more to that,
Mm-hmm.
but we already saw them attack them in the forest, so we know they already don't like him.
Mm-hmm.
They call them witches,
Yeah.
which is basically all they did on the boat as well. Um, and then we have Kiergan's backstory where Grisha have been persecuted until he created the fold, right? So
Mm.
we already saw those motivations. Like it just felt like it was adding a bit more to it, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like it was necessarily needed,
Okay.
um, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But and I think a lot of my problem with it feeling rushed and like having that third plot line not tie in is partly because they're taking two different book series and throwing them together. Um,
Yes.
yes, they're same timeline of events, but if it was maybe, I'm going to assume the books do a better job of fleshing out the things because they have more time to work with it. Uh,
Yeah,
but
from what I've read, because I did a little research on how it was related to the books. From what I understand, the show changes the books a ton.
oh, okay,
Um, in fact, my understanding is the crows. So, like Shadow and Bone, we see that Alina story. The other thing I've heard from a few different people is that Shadow and Bone as a book was actually really not that good.
I've heard the same.
And that that it was a series that, because that was like the author's first book, like ever, you know, and that she progressively got better at her craft, which that's typical of writers. Um,
Whoa, practice makes you better at something?
Whoa,
Wow.
wow. So apparently she got a lot better, and her stories got a lot better, and her characters became a lot more fleshed out as time went on.
Okay.
And my other understanding is that the Six of Crows, while it is in the same world, it is at a different time period, at
Oh,
least in the
okay.
books.
Okay.
Um, That's my understanding. Again, I haven't read them. That's just what I have read as I've read some people's articles and reviews on kind of how the books and the TV show compare. Is that it is at a totally different period of time, and that the fact that these characters are interacting is somewhat non-canon according to the books,
Oh,
but
okay.
but that this was I guess we would call a calculated choice by the writers and directors of the show in working with the author. So essentially they came and were like, "Hey, we want to do." Essentially they decided that Shadow and Bone, the book itself, didn't have enough, and that Six of Crows, those three characters were widely more popular even than the main characters of Shadow and Bone.
Yeah.
Um, and so they wanted to find a way to kind of just use the universe and tell essentially the same story, right? But kind of fuse them together and mix and match things and tell almost a new story in some ways. Um, with the
Okay.
same characters, and that the author, the original author, was heavily involved in the writing of how all of that would work. Um, I think it was the director said he called her almost every night to ask, would this make sense for this character to do this? Would this, would this character be capable of this? Why could we fuse these? Could we move this? Could we do this? Help me understand a timeline that'll work, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was that I think is really cool that you know the author was so heavily involved in essentially rewriting her own story. Um, and fusing kind of these storylines. And um I think that ultimately was a good decision in my opinion. Because I could see if you didn't have the Crows storyline, I think we'd be in trouble.
Yes.
We'd
Yes, I
run
agree.
out of content real fast. Um and I think I think that was a good decision there.
Okay. Well, again, I haven't read the books, so I can't comment on how well they changed storyline.
Yeah, let me know in the comments if anybody's read the books. Let me know how completely wildly inaccurate I am with my basic reviewing. I have heard some people concerned just with what they changed, that they're like, I don't know where this is going. Like, I feel like this is gonna mess up the canon later down the line. So I don't know. We'll see. Could
Yeah,
be interesting. Um,
but I do know I'm excited for season 2.
yes. So
I'm
we talked about what we didn't like. Let's talk about what we did like.
as I mentioned before. I thought the acting was phenomenal.
Yes.
Um, it's been great. I can't even, don't even remember his name. Um,
Ben Barnes?
uh,
Are you talking about Kiergan?
they,
Yeah.
yes, Caspian.
Caspian.
Been along. I thought he was great in Dawn Treader. I think he was way better in this though. Um, I felt, again, not knowing the books, not knowing characters,
Yeah.
how well they're supposed to be. Kiergan was a very compelling villain to me.
I
And
agree.
I think a lot of that is just how Ben Barnes portrayed him.
Hmm.
The his mannerisms as the character, just excellently done.
Hmm.
Um, I've heard complaints about Alina as a character is kind of meh, but I thought the actor did a good job with that.
Hmm.
Um, and I still think Alina was an okay character. She wasn't amazing, but still fine.
Yeah.
And then I loved the crows.
Yeah.
Again,
All
I
three
think the
of them.
crows were the highlight for me.
Yeah.
But all three of them did a good job. I liked the Kaz as actor did a
Hmm.
great job with that. Um, so again, acting was probably my favorite part of the series, and whoever was in charge of the effects, set, and costumes, like that whole department, the now I can't remember the term for it, film term for like everything that's not basically everything that's not the acting. It's
Mm-hmm.
the no, it's a French term. I won't remember it.
I
But
can't remember
all
either.
of that, the costumes and the world I was drawn in. I was like, man, this reminds me of Russia, but it doesn't feel like Russia at the same time.
Yeah.
This is a really interesting fantasy world I want to see more of.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and um, I'm a sucker for guns plus magic, so having that together, yes, you already sold me there.
Yeah.
Those are probably my favorite parts of the series.
Yeah. I agree. I think the acting was really well done. Um and you touched on Alina as well. I've heard that her character in the show, they actually made her much like, from what I heard in the books, she's more of just a damsel in distress and doesn't really do much.
Not much
Um
agency.
and but they allowed her to do way more in the show. You know, she does feel, I feel like there is some like personal strength with Alina's character um in the show that I've heard isn't necessarily present in the books. So I was happy about that. I do think the acting, I think the crows were particularly interesting, like you mentioned. Um, I think the world building for me was excellent. And when I say world building, I'm not just talking about the way the story, like where they are, but the sets, the costumes,
Yes.
it and the consistent kind of feel of just everything about it. It does feel like a different world.
Yes.
And it feels like a world that's got a lot to explore and a lot of depth, and a world that I would be interested to see more of and learn more about.
Yes.
I think the magic system was interesting to me. Um, it's not the most like, whoa, that's a cool way to think about magic. You know, it's kind of a
Yeah.
standard. It's kind of a pretty basic magic system. Um, you know,
But it was like it worked though. Like you
but
don't
it
need a complex
worked.
magic system
No.
to be interesting.
Yeah.
I thought like, oh, you have these different classes of Grisha,
Mm-hmm.
and then some are more rare than others, and they have all these different abilities.
Yes.
Sweet. And then we even saw how a lot of the so one big thing for me with magic systems and how world building works. If your magic is not tied into like, oh, hey, you have this, which
Mm.
means like transportation changes or this kind of thing,
Yeah.
I don't feel like your world building is connected very well, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
if we had wind powers, we would have those like land ships, right?
Yeah.
We would have all these different like ways to transport things. And so having them like, oh yeah, we have this now. We have doors that are only Grisha can open, like with heart renders or whatever.
Yes.
Really enjoyed that. Really fleshed out the world for me.
I think that's a great point that I hadn't really thought of as to how it, like, you're right. If with a magic system, like if all these people have magic, they're gonna be using it for like everyday things as well. Like, like, how does that affect the everyday lives of the people in the world? It's not just to fight with. I liked
Right.
being able to see how the magic was used in other avenues than just, burning someone or blowing someone
Yeah.
away or slicing someone in half. You know what I mean? Like, show the powering of the ships with wind, showing, the heart renders are used kind of as like a therapy to calm people down, as well as like the healing abilities,
Or get information like
or
we saw
get
at the beginning.
information, or keep their blood warm, right?
Hmm.
Slow heartbeats, speed up heartbeats, being able to see how all of that kind of functions. The other thing that I thought was really interesting about the magic system is specifically with Kurgan and Alina, right? The light and the dark. When he used his darkness or whatever, when he used his dark magic, and everything became black, right? And then Alina would use light and produce this light. But if you noticed, once she stopped, you would slowly see that light to return to the areas where it's from, right?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
the candles or the chandelier, right? And it was the same with the darkness. When he pulled the darkness, it would come out of the dark areas of the room and then fill the room. So it was I liked that, as far as like it wasn't like he was just creating black. you
Yeah.
know, he was
He was pulling it from
pulling
somewhere.
it from the areas in the room and adding to it. And then all Alina was doing, it was taking the light that was around and summoning it and focusing it into a smaller area, right, to make it brighter. And I thought that
Yeah.
was a nice touch. Um, and then I also like having, anytime you're going to have a magic system, it's very easy for that magic system to become overpowered, you know? Um, so I liked that they do have some rules, like they have to touch their hands together first, um, for the
For
small
certain types of
science. Yeah,
magic.
for certain types of
Yeah.
magic. And so I appreciated having at least some rules on it,
Yeah.
some limits to what they were capable of doing. For example, Kirigan, he can summon darkness. He can't summon light or fire or wind, right?
Yeah.
There
He's
are
this.
limits to his type of power.
Um, it's a good point to bring up. I liked how within fantasy there's kind of like two schools of thought now. We got hard magic systems and soft magic systems.
Mm,
Hard has very well defined limits and rules. Um, Here's what you can and can't do with magic. You can't break this rule.
mm-hmm.
Soft is more fuzzy, right?
Yeah.
Oh, like a good example of this would be Lord of the Rings has two good examples of hard and soft magic. Gandalf is very soft magic. We don't know what that man can do.
Yeah.
But then you have the ring. The ring is, hey, you wear it, you turn invisible, and the dark one can see you. Not the dark one.
Sauron.
Sauron.
We'll just
Thank
say
you. I
Sauron.
don't know why I lost his name. So within the Grishaverse, we had very similar. We had, hey, if you're using magic, you have to touch your hands together. It's all focused through your hands, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you had the stag. How does the stag bone melding thing work? I don't know.
I don't
But
know.
this is what happens at the end. We see the effect, and it
Mhm.
works in the story.
Yeah.
We don't need that one to have we don't need the explanation of its limits and stuff.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed
that's a good
how
point.
Shadow and Bone had both of those elements in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one
So-
other thing I really wanted to touch on, about Shadow and Bone that I really appreciated. I thought the editing was very, very good.
Okay.
And one thing I wanted to bring up that I've noticed, and I haven't heard anybody else really mentioning this, Netflix, for their action sequences, specifically their fights, they are starting to develop a style to the point where now when I watch something that's a Netflix original, I can almost tell that it's a Netflix original just by watching without anybody telling me. And there's a couple of things. One thing that they didn't do in Shadow and Bone that I was like, I wonder if they will, but they didn't. And then one thing that they did. The thing that they didn't do is I've noticed in a lot of these period pieces, they will use very what I would consider non-traditional music choices
Okay.
in their show. For example, like in Peaky Blinders, it's set
I knew you were gonna bring
right.
up Peaky
I
Blinders.
mean, I have to. I have to. It wouldn't be a Stack Shack podcast episode if I don't bring up Peaky Blinders. So, for example, in Peaky Blinders, the it's set in between or it's set after the World Wars, or in between the World Wars, I should say.
Right.
And they are but the soundtrack, the music is very like 90s grunge, I would almost say. Like it's very like aggressive, like it's not time period correct music.
Right.
And then you have something like The Irregulars, right? It's got like rap beats and stuff in it, and you're like,
Get
okay.
those 808s in there.
Yeah, and it's just thrown into, again, another, period piece. And so I was curious if Shadow and Bone would do that. They didn't. it's a more what I would consider a traditional fantasy soundtrack. It's more orchestral, and there you go. Um, I'm not going to get into the details of the sound, but it was more traditional fantasy sounding.
Yeah, it's what you would
Um,
expect.
it was what you would expect. And I thought I think that's a perfectly fine choice. I've liked it in I like it in Peaky Blinders. I didn't really like it in Irregulars, so I think it could be hit or miss doing that. Um, but what they did do that I noticed is how they cut their fight scenes. And the first show or the first movie actually that I noticed this in was Extraction, the action movie with Chris Hemsworth. Um, they do this thing, and I actually really like it. Um, I'm not a fan of the like quick cut editing style that is for
Hard to
some
follow.
reason really popular. I don't understand
Yeah.
why. I haven't met anybody who's like, "Oh, I freaking love that quick cut editing." Like I don't know anybody that really likes it, but that style of like you have 8 camera angles on the fight and you just like jump around on all the angles. I feel like it pulls you out of the fight and doesn't like you're just moving so fast that you kind of can't really tell what's going on. You're just like, okay, they're fighting. There you go.
Yeah.
Um, but what they do in Extraction and what they did a few times in Shadow and Bone is, and it's kind of hard to explain, but essentially the camera like follows the movement of the person. Um, and I may actually post um an example of this, but like for example in that first opening fight scene with Mao, um where he's in the
Like
boxing
in the
match,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, okay.
The way the camera like follows when the guy gets hit, and it like the camera slams into the ground as well.
Yes.
I am such a sucker for that editing technique. It is my favorite thing ever. I think it is so cool. Um and it's also similar to how they edited Kong Godzilla, where they put quote unquote cameras on their fists. So like you would fly in, and it makes it
Oh yeah.
it draws you into that impact, and to me it makes it feel like it's just hitting harder. um and they did that a lot in Extraction. And they did it quite a few times in Shadow and Bone as well, with you know it the movement of the camera I just thought was amazing, and I absolutely loved it. And please somebody else do the same thing, because Netflix is killing it with that editing technique. Whoever came up with that idea and figured out how to do that is a genius, and I love them. I Yeah, so the moment I saw that that editing style in that fight between Mao, in that boxing match at the very beginning, I was like, "Oh, they're using that technique again. Oh, I'm so excited." Like, yes, let's go. Um so I thought camera work was done really well. The other thing that they did a lot that I really appreciated was they did a lot of like what I would call parallel shots, um,
Okay.
where like you've seen like the scene has been like essentially the same shot has been done at some other point in the show, and then you're seeing it again, and it kind of has this like mini deja vu, but also what that other scene was, like you can remember it. And so it has this like compare
Calls back to that
contrast
scene for
that
you.
calls back, and also this like contrasting nature. You'll see maybe like a different character in it or whatever. um I should have wrote down the actual episodes that those were in, but I really appreciated those as well. I thought those were really well done, as these comparison scenes and comparing situations that were the same. And I thought they used camera angles and the way the editing was done, and even to some extent the lighting, um to communicate without being too obvious that this is this kind of the same scene over again, but to show that and contrast that. And I thought that was really cool. I like those kinds of things as well.
I think a good example of that would be the first scene in The Fold, and Alina gets her powers, right? And then that's basically what happens at the end as well.
True.
I think, like, was it her? Like at the beginning, it was her being like above Mal, right?
Yes.
When her powers activated, and the second time it was Mal above her.
Yes. Yes.
Like a good parallel there in The Fold. Same thing, similar thing happening. Yeah, no, I appreciated those as well. A nice touch.
Yeah. What'd you think of the geography of the world?
Like how The Fold is breaking up the one country, kind of.
Yeah, how do you think
that element?
I've heard some people complain that it was a little hard to follow, kind of like where they were or like how all these things fit together. What'd you think about how they kind of explained the locations, etc.?
At times it was a little hard to follow. But I didn't understand they were in West Ravka to begin with. Like when Mal, I didn't realize that's where Mal and Alina were before they crossed the Fold.
Okay. Yeah.
So later on, when the people were like, "Oh yeah, we got to get back to West Ravka," I'm like, "Whoa, wait, well, explain that a bit more." And so after thinking about it, it made more sense. But I didn't think it was too hard to follow after that. Hey, you have she arrived there on the other side, and they're like, okay, she arrived at East Ravka, right? And so then now they're what is it? So she's in East Ravka, which means that's why I don't understand how West Ravka heard about it and how the crows heard about it, I guess.
Well, hold on. Aren't the crows in East?
No, because they have to go across to get her.
Yes, but she doesn't make it across.
Wait, hold up. They have to go across to get her, right?
They do, but they're in East. So she doesn't make it across because remember only that one the one
he ran through, yeah.
Person ran through, but they came back out the other side.
I wasn't sure about that, especially considering the crows had to start in West Ravka because the one guy Arkin, the conductor, meets with the West Ravkan general before they go. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So the crows are in West Ravka, and
the crows are in West Ravka.
They go across to East Ravka.
Yes, and Alina never goes to West Ravka, or is never in West Ravka until the very end of the movie.
Okay, I did not catch that then.
Because Alina,
even if it is confusing, I don't think it's necessary to understand the story too well.
Agreed. Even we're
yeah, we're still like
a little confused.
Disagreeing
I'm pretty sure she was in East. She went into the Fold, and then came back out on the East, like went back. But the one cartographer ran through. That's my understanding.
Let's pulling up the synopses to see what happens, to see if we can figure this out.
Maybe I'll have to rewatch it again and double check myself, but I'm pretty sure that's how it worked. But this is a perfect example. Even if the world, as far as like which side of the Fold they were on, wasn't fully clear, it didn't harm the story. We just knew this person was on one side and this person was on another, right? You just kind of said, okay, Alina's on this side, and then the crows are on this side, and then now the crows are coming over to Alina's side. That's really all you really need to know. And then you know that on that other side, where she necessarily started, I don't think is the end of the world. So I and I'm pretty sure she started on the east and ends up on the east. Like she never goes over to the west until the end of the show. But anyways,
Yeah,
it
could be.
was still enjoyable. It still made total sense. We still understood everything about the show. Even if the geography was a little tough to follow, because I know for me, I was like having to try and like really focus on where were we here, um,
Yeah.
because I think it was a little difficult to follow. Um, but I think it was handled as well as can be. You know what I mean? Like ultimately, um, you have to have people crossing on either sides. So
Yeah.
you know, it's if I messed up when I was trying to follow it, that's on me. That's not really on you. You gave me every single time you ended up in one or the other location, you told me where we were. So if I got confused halfway through about which side was which, that's on me. You're telling me every single episode where we are. So,
Yeah.
you know,
It's not to say it couldn't have been more clear,
I
but
think it could have been a little
again,
more clear, but yeah, it wasn't. I don't think it was a problem.
yeah, it didn't impact the show too much.
Yeah,
Like again, we only if they're on East Africa the whole time, we only come back at the very end, so it doesn't impact much.
yeah, it
Uh,
really doesn't. They don't. Yeah, if you were confused as to which spot they started on, that doesn't really matter. By the end of the first episode, you have established the locations of main characters, and then you know from then. You know what I mean?
mm,
So I thought that was good. Um, Another thing that I wanted to mention about, at least for me in the world building, I really appreciated that they didn't try and do too much.
yes.
Because
Um,
to contrast Shadow and Bone with Cursed, which is a cursed show, aptly named, I guess.
yeah, yes.
Um,
Some foresight there.
oof. That world, again, I actually thought that world was interesting. I thought it was a cool take. It was like a prequel to King Arthur. How did the Lady of the Lake become the Lady of the Lake? Right? Okay, that's kind of interesting. But that show tried to do way too much. And it failed on every category because of that. It tried to have this really deep romance. It tried to have this really epic, elaborate world building. It tried to establish a difficult and complicated magic system. It tried to have very aggressive political constructs and a political nature, all while writing an origin story for the Lady of the Lake and having a bunch of commentary on like racial tension. And because it tried to do so much, it failed to do any of those things well.
That's not to say a show can't do all of those well, like in
True,
the same show.
true.
I what I think happened. What I think is a better way to approach that is instead of trying to resolve all of those plot lines in that one season, it's easier to
Exactly.
just set the way for the next one. You can have this if you set the groundwork for political tension or a romance.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to resolve any of those plot lines
Nope.
in this season.
Exactly. And I loved that about Shadow and Bone. At the end of Shadow and Bone, I went, there's so much more we can do. Because they
Yes.
just laid a foundation and they didn't try. They did enough. There's enough resolution for us to
Yeah.
have a story and for us to feel like that was a completed season, you know.
Mhm.
Um, but they didn't try and do too much. They didn't try. They just hinted at these little things. Like there's a bunch of interesting political dynamics going on, but they
Yeah. We
didn't
have.
try and make them too much. They were just like, yeah, they're there. We're kind of working through them. We don't have to explicitly go through all of that stuff.
Yeah. We didn't even have the resolution of a romance either. We
No,
had, hey, Kirigan's no longer a love interest, but we don't have Mal and Alina as a couple or anything.
nope. And
We
and
don't have.
also Kaz and Inej, there's kind of something there. Jesper seems like your typical gunslinger playboy kind of guy, you know, so I doubt
Your Doc Holiday.
so I don't know if he'll ever have. I have heard he does have a long-term love interest that comes later, but again, we didn't need to have every character have a love interest and every character have. We didn't
Yeah.
have to do that. And I appreciate, I'd rather you do a really good job at the couple of storylines and the couple of things that you want to do than try and do too much. You know, like
Yes.
I'm much happier sitting here talking with you and we're like, man, I wish they would have explored a little bit more of Kaz and Inej and Jesper's like backstory and relationship and what their motivations were. But you know what?
Hmm.
I bet we'll get that later. And I'd rather have them take it slow, you know, and not fully flesh things out than rush through and try and resolve and flesh out a million
Yes.
storylines.
I'd
Uh,
much rather have it be a like they didn't live up to the potential they had, rather than they completely botched the potential.
exactly. Like why are we excited for season 2? Cuz I want to learn more about these characters, right? You still
Yes.
have me hooked rather than, well, I found out everything about those characters and that was kind of lame and their motivations made absolutely no sense because they were rushed so much. Like I'd much rather be sitting here going, they're so mysterious. I just don't really know enough about them to know like what's going on. I'd rather have that mystery than actually know that they did a terrible job of building their
Yeah.
characters.
And earlier when I said I thought some plot lines were rushed or
Mm-hmm.
relationships were rushed, right? It wasn't me saying that they did a poor job of it. I just felt like there could be more there, which is
Yeah.
a much better criticism to me than saying, "Hey, this was just bad."
Yes, exactly.
Not saying I'm a good critic. Like I'm not saying I'm good at giving criticism. I'm saying I would much rather have this as a criticism about it.
Yeah, totally.
Um,
Like for example, I thought Kirigan and Alina was a bit rushed.
yeah,
Like I didn't quite get why. I mean, but there was enough there that I was like, okay, I can get it. Like it was
yeah,
well established that Kirigan would kind of pick his favorite of the female Grisha and would take her for, rides with, you get to ride with the general,
oh
that
yes,
kind of a thing, right? And he is, he's a powerful, good-looking guy and he's the general and he's in charge and he
he's
protects
got
all of
this
them
charisma.
and he has a good charisma and the slick and he's the only one. He's kind of unique, he's a unique
Yeah, and then you
person.
had Alina kind of be not vulnerable, but hurt because she wasn't hearing back from Mal,
She wasn't
so
hearing
she was
back from
looking for
Mal.
another place to put her feelings at the time.
Yep. And you have the situation of you see her kind of like, I am rejecting I'm going to be my own person, and
Get
like
rid of my scar on
get
my
rid of
hand.
my scar on my hand and I'm going to forget about my old life and I'm going to be who I'm supposed to be. I'm going to come into my age, right? And so she's like, I just want to do something crazy kind of a thing. There's kind of that
Yeah,
coming of age, I'm my person and as my first decision I'm going to do something nobody would expect me to do, right?
right.
And like he says, not often that people surprise me. Like he's even surprised, right? So I
Yeah,
think there was
it's
enough there. It did feel a little rushed, and I was a little bit like, okay, fine,
right, but it
Um,
was a believable rushed,
but it was
right?
a believable rushed. It wasn't the most compelling, you know. Again, it felt kind of YA at that in those parts, I think. Um, and maybe as a younger person, I would have been all in on the relationship, but uh, I realistically right now I'm like, okay, whatever. I kind of see it. I saw it coming from a mile away. I didn't find their relationship, their chemistry to be particularly great.
Yeah,
But I think that was on purpose because it's not supposed to be her long-term love interest. This really it kind of plays in even more into that fact of her just doing something crazy that no one would expect, right? Um, but again, they gave enough resolution in the story without trying to do too much or resolve too much, and they left me excited for next season. Like
yes,
at the end of Cursed, I was actually sort of hoping for another season, but the reason I was hoping for it was so that they could actually do it right. Like I was just so I was
You were
excited
hoping
about.
they would just retcon everything, basically.
I was essentially like, okay, um, can we just actually do a season where we actually learn anything about what's going on? Like, you know what I mean? Like, can we actually just pick a storyline and like I felt like, well, maybe if they greenlight them for another couple seasons, the writers will feel, you know, because that's honestly, you can't all. I will never always blame the writers fully when they do that kind of a thing when it feels rushed because sometimes they just are rushed. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
they just don't have the
you're
time to do everything
you're
they need to.
allowed this many episodes and this is all the story you have to cover, and they're like, crap, not possible. They're like, don't care, do it anyway. Like, okay, we're gonna do the best we can. So sometimes they're doing the best they can, and I'm you know, props to you for trying.
Yeah,
It just doesn't work out sometimes, but I
especially when
appreciated
you're
this
doing
one.
book adaptions. You're
Very
adapting
true.
another
Yep.
story where they have. I don't know how long Shadow and Bone was, or the Six of Crows series, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing you're at least 1,000 pages of content that was
Mm-hmm.
put into this season.
Yeah. Well, and then you combine the fact that like I had heard that they combine certain books that aren't even at the same time period, and you're doing all these things. I really appreciated that the world building I thought was just it was so immersive. I think you touched
Hmm.
on that. You mentioned the word immersion, and I think that's the best way to put it. Like, did I learn everything to know about the world? No. But while I was there, I was immersed in that world. Like there is a
Yes.
lot more to explore, but when I was in the show, watching the show, I felt like I understood what was going on as it related to those people.
Yes. And another thing, for me at least, I'm not big on fantasy series where like set in real life, right?
Mm,
Sometimes I'm okay with it. It's not a make or break for me. But when you're like, oh, here's clearly this is a different world, but oh, this is clearly this thing, right?
mm,
Um, I didn't feel that way with Shadow and Bone.
no.
Um, I definitely felt like, oh, this kind of like climate and the uniforms of soldiers and stuff. Oh, this
Yeah.
kind of feels like 1900s Russia, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it still had its own feel to it. It had its own. Um, I didn't feel like I was just, oh, this is Russia with magic.
Yeah.
And I think the fold it really sets apart the world building for me at times.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like this is such an interesting. Oh, this is the no one passes through here without getting hurt somehow, or
Mm-hmm.
like such an interesting aspect to the world, and having like the conductor like tying that into, oh, here's all like passage across the fold's a big business now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like how do they get across? All that really added to that for me. Really helped pull me into the world.
I agree. I agree. Um, I love and I like steampunk aesthetics, and it had
Oh
kind
yeah,
of that steampunk aesthetic underneath, and I thought that was really cool.
especially
Um,
Jesper's top hat.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I thought Jesper, yeah, I thought Jesper was a great character. I thought Inej was a great character, Kaz. I thought the acting was really good. Um, yeah, just overall, I think it was a great show, and I'm really excited for season two.
It was solid, yeah.
Cool.
Definitely ready for the next one.
Yeah, gonna be exciting, and got me in my fantasy feels. I'm ready to go,
Oh
ready to
yeah.
rock and roll for
We'll,
the
we'll have
rest
a
of
bit
what
of
we
a
come.
we'll have a bit of a break. We'll get some Star Wars content, get the sci-fi in,
Yep, get our
um,
sci-fi out
and then this fall we
this
got
fall.
we got the big three coming. Let's
The
go.
big three. It's going to be legendary. Legendary. And hopefully you will stay with us for all of that. With that, we're going to bring today's episode to a close. Go watch Shadow and Bone. Tell us what you thought about it in the comments. Love to keep this discussion going. And we'll see you next week.